All right.
All right.
Good afternoon.
Great afternoon.
Great afternoon.
Wonderful afternoon.
Any more adjectives you got?
Sexy afternoon.
Oh, bless
Fabulous
it be the
afternoon.
name.
But more importantly,
Happy Black History Month.
Happy Black History Month, and it's by God's grace that we are here today.
Amen. Because many of us didn't make it.
So we thank God for being here.
Amen.
For a brand new year.
Brand new year, right? Brand new month.
Brand new month.
What else happened this month? A special guy that I know just turned 51.
I know. And he still looks so sexy.
It's the love of my life.
I know.
Mr. Graham Brown.
I'm making 51 look good, you are.
He's bringing Christian sexy back.
As one person told me, one co-worker said, "No, you look good for your age." That's okay. No, that's not flattering. But
you're always trying to be flattered. You're like the king of flattery.
Yes.
You love flattery. But as we're here, we want to welcome everybody. Today, we are talking about today is a lunch note. Get your cup, sir. We be forgetting.
Lunch note.
Lunch notes. Cheers. And today, talking about something little lightweight heavy, but it definitely needs to be discussed. We're talking about grief today.
Yes.
How do you deal with it?
How do you deal with it?
Signs and symptoms.
And especially this month and beginning of this year, we have so much funeral. I mean, I will go back to back.
Well, explain why. Who had funerals?
Our church.
Yeah.
Family. Some of her family members have passed away, so we had to go support them.
Not my family members.
And but as the Bible says, when one suffer, all suffer. When one grieve, all grieve.
Way to reel that back in.
Yeah, but this is a very important topic.
Yeah.
We just want, how do we handle this? Because oftentimes we don't get to talk about this, right?
We
tend to
don't.
numb it a lot.
Right. Or we always push those feelings away and say, I'm fine. It'll be okay. You'll get through this. And the fact of the matter is, it's hard.
Right. It's not
easy.
Right. So, but we're going to begin with a quote.
Let's begin. I got the quote today.
So she got a quote today.
All right. Today's quote is by Earl Grolman. And it says, grief is not a disorder, a disease, or a sign of weakness. It's an emotional, physical, and spiritual necessity. It's the price you pay for love. The only cure for grief is to grieve. The only way, or the cure to grief is to grieve.
And that is so true.
All right. Welcome
to Church Folks
Be Talking. The lunch note edition.
The nut note.
The
note.
The note. That note. See, because you threw that in there. We weren't even talking.
No, we said it not script. But anyway.
The lunch note edition.
Yes.
I am one of your hosts, Dr. Frankie Graham Brown, and next to me is Pastor P.
In the house.
Brown. Yes. And today we're sporting. I can't be remiss if I don't shout out partners in my company here that I'm working with. Cool Nerds. So if you're nerds, just know you're cool.
Ironic. You have glasses here. You got glasses on.
It is us.
That's the irony.
It is the irony.
Yeah, Cool Nerds.
Cool Nerds. Shout out to Cool Nerds.
But these Cool Nerds looking good though.
All right, so today flattery.
Just always get you something.
So today we are going to be talking about, as I alluded to in our introduction, what is grief, and then we're going to talk about why is this a topic? Why do we need to talk about it? Again, in the wakes of just killings and shootings and everything that is happening just in our city and around the world, it's important to understand, how do we deal with these traumatic issues that are reoccurring, right?
Right, and people need to learn how to process grief. Pain is real.
And we also want to talk about how to recognize if you're grieving or not. If you're on the other side of that, how do you know if your brother and sister are going through something, and how do you help?
Right. And this is not about, telling people just get over it. No.
No, because you're not.
Because
it's hard.
if you tell people to get over it, you're not really helping them to process it.
Or you might be gaslighting them. Right. It's not really that bad.
But then again, sometimes people only know what they know.
Right. And we'll talk about the different kinds of grief and what that looks like as well.
Right.
Also, how to heal is going to be one of the major components of this conversation. And what does the Bible say about grieving? How can you help your brothers and sisters just go through the process together? I think it's quite important. Right. So there might quite possibly be a two-parter on this.
Definitely going to be a two-parter.
Are we definitely doing that?
Oh, definitely.
All right.
Because there's so much into this, and we don't want to rush it, but we want to attempt to do our best.
Yeah, do due diligence.
Yeah, due diligence, right? So we can somehow, hopefully, with someone who lost someone recently, and sometime you have an hard time to process that. We're hoping and praying that this episode today would be a opportunity for you to help you to go through the process.
Yeah. Or the loss of something.
Right.
I also want to discuss that. Grief is more than just the loss of a person.
Right.
It's the loss of things as well.
And sometimes it could be...
And that hurts just the same, right? That hurts just the same. That was one of my second to biggest grieving seasons, the loss of something.
Right.
And not someone. Right. No, my mom was number one.
Number one.
Number two was that job I was supposed to get that I didn't. That hurt. But did we do the quote?
Yeah, you did.
So let's jump into it.
Only way to heal is to grieve.
Only way to
grieve.
Cure grief
is to grieve. So
let's talk about
the different types.
What that is. What is grief?
Grief. I think you have a definition.
You want me to go with mine?
Yeah, go with the definition.
All right. So according to the Mayo Clinic, grief is a strong, sometimes overwhelming emotion for people, regardless of whether sadness stems from the loss of a loved one or the anguish experienced after a significant loss. Okay. That is another one. And it's also identified by the American Psychological Association, the anguish experienced after a significant loss. It includes physiological distress, separation anxiety, confusion, yearning, obsessive dwelling over the past, and even apprehension of the future are all different ways people face or witness grief.
From what you just described there, I think that phrase when it said obsessive dwelling on the past, that's one of the key phrases right there, because sometimes grief prolong because we are prolonging remembering the memories.
Yeah, we're stuck, or we're fixated on a time, and that really prevents a lot of us from moving forward because we're so heavily reminiscent on the past and we don't know how to get out of that.
But there's two ways though, right? There's two ways that can operate. One is one can be negative, one can be positive.
Okay.
If you reminisce on the past and you remember what you guys have been doing, the stuff that you have done, and and that can pull you down. But you also, in a positive way, you can remember the past in a way, you honor those memories,
right,
and let those memories be your engine, so to speak, to get you moving forward.
Right.
Because the way we're gonna honor their life is to honor the memory that we share with them.
I agree. So now that we know what grief is, let's talk about why is this conversation even necessary?
I think it is necessary because, especially in the church today, we don't have a ministry of grief. I've read this before.
Well, some churches do.
Ours do, but
ours
we don't.
In particular, our church does not.
And the most black churches, I can't say most. I can give you the statistics to say.
Did our former church have a grief ministry?
No.
In Louisville?
No, they don't. No, I mean I can remember that they don't. And
I mean, do we not know because we were never a part of it, or did it just not have one at all?
Well, because I think sometimes we kind of we spiritualize some things, right? And not realizing that we are human beings and we have feelings, we have emotion, and we said to people, "Oh, just pray, and God will make it better."
Yeah.
But you remember, the only way we can overcome grief is being part of a community that can come alongside us and help us on the journey.
Right.
And sometimes we don't have that, and we need that desperately in the churches today, and especially the churches that I minister. We do need that.
Gotta keep your hand off.
Yeah, we do need that ministry. So there's a lack.
What do you think the biggest pushback, or maybe the reason why churches do not have a ministry geared towards this? Is it because of lack of facilitators? Because it takes a certain kind of person to really lead a ministry, someone who's transparent. Because I believe, as the old adage says, you don't know where I'm going unless you've walked in my shoes.
Right.
So you can't be a grief minister who's never went through anything, right? You can't be a grief facilitator.
I mean, that's part of it too,
right?
But
so you have to.
It could be a number of things.
Go through it, right. But then are you willing to go through that journey again? Because you're going to go through it every time you minister to someone, and that could be triggering for a lot of people.
I think you're right. I think there's many reasons why.
Yeah.
But what you said is having someone who's been through, Dr. Tovin said, if you have a cancer and you go to a doctor, the doctor who may not have a cancer, never been through what you've been through, cannot sympathize what you're going through.
Right.
But if you have a doctor, a female doctor who went through,
or a male
doctor who have cancer, they know how to be empathetic with the patient who's going through.
Right.
Because they know the pain, they know the trauma, they know what's happening. So they are more easier they are more easier to navigate the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But having the right person who's been through it, we need that person. Another thing also is that
you might hit it.
We just don't have people stepping up, knowing who they. Well, this is not a conversation, but knowing your call. All right.
Yeah.
Oftentimes we want the pastor to do it, we want the deacon to do it. But if God has gifted you in that area, if you've been through some grief and some outcome in your life,
mm-hmm.
that you can assist someone in that ministry,
mm-hmm.
then I think that person should step up, right? That person should step up.
I think I agree with that. But then again, as I just mentioned before, it's the retriggering of it all. Like, do I really want to bring that back?
But let me say this there. No, you have to come to a place where you are strong enough,
right?
Where you're healed.
So you're not going to push off a traumatic incident.
My recommendation is that
I'm going to help others.
Right. My recommendation that if you have not overcome the grief process,
I would say healed. I wouldn't. say overcome,
healed. Right. Well, healed. Put it that way. If you're not healed from that experience, then
mm-hmm.
you cannot step in because you don't want to re-dramatize.
Right. And I just want to say something real quick to add to that. Not only you have to make sure you have the proper people in place to lead those ministries, you have to have the grievers, the grievees, to come forward and say, I need help. Because most of us don't. And we'll talk about that too. A lot of us don't want to bring those emotions to the table. There's a lot of mistrust in the church. There's a lot of lack of transparency, a lot of conflict. Lack of conflict.
My thing is
why I want to bring you my mess if you're gonna potentially demean it or it's considered to be disenfranchised grief, right?
Yeah, but I do believe that.
Or do you feel comfortable enough?
No, we need well, put it this way,
right?
People in the church, Christians in the church, need to how can I say this? Not in a very insensitive way, but in a way. Listen, it's time to step up.
Mm-hmm.
It's time to step up because
on both sides.
Yeah. Because
we want to heal you.
Right.
You need healing.
My thing is that if you look at the AA group out there.
Oh yeah, Alcoholics Anonymous.
Now, listen, if they can't do it, if people can come out there and sit and talk, I mean, it's not easy initially to do it. Yeah. But at least they're making the steps. So there come a point in our life where we have to step up.
Just take accountability, right? Be responsible for your feelings because grief not only impacts you, and we'll discuss that it impacts your family members, right?
Right. Impact everybody.
And you're sitting on some stats. Give us some of those.
Well, the stat I have here is said more than 57% of Americans report experiencing a major loss over the last 3 years. Now, 57%.
That's over half.
That's which means that there's no conversation, right? There's no conversation that's been taken.
All right.
That need to address it.
So
it's like a silent.
Yeah. You're grieving in silence.
Right. You're grieving in silence.
It also means that every other person you meet is grieving.
As one preacher said, you are suffering within silently, quietly, suffering, but you won't tell anybody what's going on.
For what? Like, don't carry that burden. Don't carry that yoke around your neck.
And God
by
never
yourself.
meant for us to carry that. As the Bible said, we must attend to each other burden, help each other in our burden. So you are not here and thinking that you are by yourself, right? We need to move from that I'm saying it's a worldly mentality. We need to move out of that mentality and say, listen, it is a community. God has provided a community where you can receive help. Listen, every place there are imperfect person. There are challenges.
And I would say the goal is, and we're not just saying that you have to come to the house of the Lord. That would be the best bet, but you have to talk to somebody. Right? You have to talk to somebody.
If you say 57% 57% of Americans reporting experiencing
major
loss over the last 3 years. That's a big thing.
I'm included in that.
Well, we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Right.
I got a stat. Can I throw one out there?
Yeah, go ahead.
About 2.5 million people pass away annually in the United States.
Annually.
Each of those 2.5 million people leave behind 5 people that are grieving for them. So take 2.5, multiply that by 5.
Ooh.
That's the amount of people that are grieving from the loss of a person.
Right.
So if I pass away, I have 5 people. I pray I have more than that, but at least 5 people that are grieving my loss. And that's impactful in all different ways.
That's a lot.
Right? And those griefs are manifested in different things, in your mental health, in your physical health, and we'll get to that as well. And then we'll also talk about how to heal and what that looks like.
Right.
What you got?
Are we going to talk about the different types?
Yeah, we can talk about the different types. I had something that says, who experiences grief? Everybody.
Everybody does.
Everybody. Even children experience grief. Now, the nuance is we all experience grief differently. No one grieves the same.
But you remember, you're going to touch on that as we go. When your mom passed away, our daughters was going through it. They were crying every day. They were crying.
I mean, that's a heavy grief, because as I'm grieving, I'm unaware of everybody else grieving because I was impacted. And so I can't even help my own kids heal because I was still broken about it, right? And so I felt like that burden was kind of on you.
It was on me.
To kind of gather all the eggs and put them in the basket and make sure that our little shells didn't crack.
Oh, Lord.
Which is... I love you for that.
It's challenging.
You got through it, but I'm sure that was challenging.
And it take understanding too, and to be more sensitive to what is going on. This is not the time to tell my daughters, get over it. Yeah, and mommy dying, gone. Let's move on.
And it's heavy to think about as well, because she's my mom, but she was your mother-in-law, right? And you still had a relationship with her.
Exactly.
The grief for her was still there with you, but probably just not in the intensity, or maybe just it comes a little bit later. So then you have to figure out, okay, we're grieving, but then I'm grieving a little bit too. How do I handle all that, right? So let's talk about, since we're in that arena, let's talk about the different types of grief. Go ahead. You want to start with that?
Well, the normal grief, basically stating that, not every grief are the same.
Right, which we've talked about.
What we talk about. Some people may have a very intensified moment. Some others may not. But that person is going through that process themselves. And you don't want to undermine each person degree of grief,
Right.
right? And I always say this sometimes, not because someone experience my experience may be larger than the other person. That person may be small. Oh, really? That's nothing. You can get over that.
Oh, well, let's get into that. We're going to get into that with those different types, right?
So
the next one, go ahead, is anticipatory grief. Just the idea of the looming feeling that something is going to happen,
right?
And I am going to grieve. Perfect example. We were talking about the death of my mom, and many of you all have faced death of loved ones, parents, grandmas, grandpas, and we knew it was coming, right? We knew it was coming for at least a year. And my brother and I, we would sit and we would talk about, okay, all right, brother, all right, sister, this is coming. What do we do? What does this look like when it's over? Let's prepare ahead of time, so when it comes, we know it's going to hit us so hard that we're really going to be unable to do anything.
Yeah.
So anticipatory grief.
Yeah, but one of the things I believe I told you what you need to do, because sometimes you were getting kind of emotional there too, that probably didn't want to face the reality. In some
denial.
Yeah, you were.
Total denial.
And I said to you, I said, no, listen.
Well, I was in more denial after it was over.
Right.
But the anticipation of it could happen any day really gripped my soul, and I couldn't function.
And especially if you see the signs.
Yes.
The signs was there. I was telling my wife, I said, listen, this is the moment that you spend some time now. So call it the time. Take the girls with you.
Definitely.
Go for a week and spend the time with your mom. Right.
And I think when you get to anticipatory grief, I think that's one of those ones that are really heavy, because it's a lingering grief. It's like you're expecting the phone to ring, but you don't quite know sure. So every phone call, you're on bated breath. Right. And so that's a hard one. What's the next one? What you got?
Disenfranchised. Okay, now it's time.
Disenfranchised
grief. In other words, that speak of when somebody, say, I, for example, may overlook what my wife been through. Because it has not impacted me as much as it did to her, right? In other words, people who, when you've been through a trauma and losing someone, now sometimes people may undermine your emotion, your feeling, because they don't really understand what it means if you have a loved one commit suicide.
Right.
Or
in that case, they say, well, they killed themselves, so why are you grieving over it? Clearly, it was intentional. Or another example of disenfranchised. Maybe you have a cousin or you have a sibling that is estranged and you don't talk to them often, and then once they pass, you find yourself grieving, and people are like, you didn't even know him like that,
right?
A co-worker like that. So why are you so bent out of shape?
Right.
So they seek to undermine or really not see the value in your grieving, because they assume that grief is only for people that you're close with, right? All right.
Next one.
Go.
Chronic grief.
Chronic.
This type of grief is when a person experiences intense reactions that don't get better over time. Wow. And then, they're just shocked. The response they get is like, they can't believe it. And in reality, it's just not sinking in.
Yeah.
Right? And he said the distress may even intensify rather than lessen.
Yeah.
Right?
I think of that as just grief that is withstanding. Long-term grief. You just cannot snap out of it. From day 1 it hurts, day 15 it hurts, year 5 it still hurts the same, and it's just an ongoing. It's chronic. And chronic pain.
And I think that one is more delicate, to be quite honest with you. If it's a snap out of it.
You can't.
No, you cannot, because if they snap out of it, then they're not dealing with the reality of the pain that they're going through.
I think they're dealing with the reality of the pain, but it's not for someone to say,
dealing with reality,
girl, you didn't grieve long enough. Get over it.
What I'm saying dealing with the reality of it is in the sense that,
they haven't confronted the loss.
Right, they haven't confronted because it's a shock to them, right?
Still,
and they're still going through it, so we can't say snap out of it. Yeah. So they got to learn how to go through the pain and emotion, even though they can't grapple with the reality.
It's a strong sense of disillusionment.
Right.
I want to say with that.
Put it that way. Right. And the next one is abbreviate grief. Number 5. It said, unlike chronic grief,
it's the opposite.
Abbreviate grief
Abbreviated. Yep.
Abbreviated, excuse me. Abbreviated grief passes quickly. This could be because a person found a distraction such as remarrying soon after the death of a spouse, because they process their loss through anticipatory grief before someone. In other words, they anticipate it's going to happen, so they prepare themselves for it. Right.
And like we said earlier, right, everybody doesn't grieve the same.
Right.
And so my grief, no matter how long that lingers, might not be the same for someone else. So that is a good example. You pass away, and then I'm sad, but then as soon as I get married, I'm doing good again.
But here's the problem,
right?
though.
So I think that's short term.
Right. But here's the problem, though. As you said, not everybody process the same time.
Right.
But here's the thing, though. But there are times when people said, "Oh, I'm hurting, but you're not crying."
We'll get into that. Don't give it away.
No, we don't give it away. But
that's
tips a little bit of that, because that sometimes can.
That's definitely a myth.
It can it can cause more friction in the marriage, or cause more friction in the family.
If the spouse is dead, how's the friction in the marriage?
Let me tell you why. Because
the family.
Right, in the family.
Okay.
So if you're saying, I'm crying, but you're not.
Right.
And wait, don't you care about such and such? Because they die, and oftentimes you don't realize the way you process this, as you said, and the way I do, is different.
Right.
And sometimes the misinterpretation of that.
What did you say earlier when we were talking about grief? You said men grieve by doing what?
Man tends to get busy with their hands, to do things outside. That's how men tend to handle their situation, right? Okay, the next one is traumatic grief.
Yeah.
Losing a loved one in a horrible, unexpected way, such as due to violence, can result in heightened emotional response. I know you talk about your dad. You want to say something about that as a kid? I mean, if you're going to talk about it, share some of that experience.
Okay.
That was
what do you want me to say? That was,
your dad
it was traumatic.
Murdered.
Yeah, he was. We lived in Gary, Indiana, which used to be the murder capital of the world for maybe 3 or 4 years in the 90s or so, when I was in high school. But I was just telling my youngest daughter, she was asking, how did Papa die? And I said, well, he was shot. He was murdered, and he was robbed. At least the story I know. Someone was trying to rob him while he was walking down the street, and he still gave them what they wanted, but in true knucklehead fashion, people feel like they have to finish it all off with a bang, and they shot him, and he went to the hospital, and he was there for maybe a few weeks, if even that, and he passed away. And that was quite traumatic. I definitely went through the stages of grief, and now I realize what those were, being so young, because I was 12.
Right, but this process here can cause somebody to become unfunctional.
Oh, I was definitely unfunctional. I remember, if I don't remember too much, I remember my mom told me he was in the hospital. And I mean, any girl loves their father to death, right? Literally. And so as my dad's in the hospital and we're going to the hospital to go see him, the nurse said I couldn't stay long because I was underage. And so what I did, I remember this, I ran myself into a wall in the bathroom and hit my head on the little medical handle that's in the stalls, and hit my head so I can have a concussion, so I can get admitted to the hospital.
Wow.
To stay by him. And I got to stay in the hospital for at least 2 or 3 days. And I said, well, I want to be right where he is. And so I was able to, not in the same room, but I was able to be in the hospital. So I was able to go up and back and forth.
Right.
And stay in the hospital. And then he passed away. So it's traumatic. It was traumatic. But being so young, I don't know if I had any symptoms. But my mom always said that prior to that, of course, I was quite loquacious and was very outgoing. And once he passed, I really became recluse, and I was quiet. My grades dropped, and I really didn't snap out of it until maybe I went to college. So I went from going on honor roll that I could barely remember to just living, just barely functioning. And
the last point we have is absent grief. This is interesting. It said, if it looks like someone is not grieving, this could be absent grief, right? It means that absent grief sometimes occurs when a death is sudden, and the person is still in shock or denial.
Oh yeah.
For example, you see the person, it's like the person is going to come back, right? From the illness, and you have a positive outlook on everything. And then the next day, well, actually not the next day, like 2 more hours, he said, "Wasn't I talking to this individual?"
You know what? That really just is just the sinker for me when people say, "I was just talking to him yesterday. We just had a conversation," and then they say he passed away, or as soon as we hung up the phone. Those right there, those creepy stories.
I give a prime example. We have a deacon who died from COVID, and when his wife was sharing that with me, I thought she was joking,
right?
Because I saw the deacon recently, and we were talking. But I knew he got sick. But when she called me and during COVID,
I remember you laughed.
Yeah,
because you were in shock.
I laughed. I said, "No, that's not possible." But what made it so real to me is when she began to cry.
Yeah.
And I said, "Whoa." She's serious.
Yeah.
But in a way, I was still denial.
We're all stunned.
Yeah. Actually, most people were stunned.
We're quite stunned.
We were quite stunned. And this one of the deacon that we loved. So
we were in shock. That's a great example, because I think the church in the whole didn't accept that until we actually until y'all actually went to the funeral. Everyone was still waiting on him to show up with his pocket full of keys, unlocking his own church, the door for his funeral. And we were like, oh, this is real.
So as we go to these 7 different types, how do we process these stages? I remember we're gonna get into it too, that they're not stages of if you're going to this stage and all that.
There are stages, but
there are stages.
There's no linear way.
There's no linear
way. You don't go from one to the next to the next. You kind of bounce around. If I overcome this, I'll go to right. So for everybody, it's everybody function differently. Let me ask you a question. Outside of that example, because you were really getting to what I was going to ask, give me an example of a time where you've maybe had a stage of grief and weren't quite sure how to deal with it. How did you overcome it? Or have you overcome like an episode of grief? And how did you overcome it? Can you recall?
A stage of grief.
Or just an issue. Have you met with any type of emotion where it caused you grief? Like a loss of something or someone, right? But how did you overcome it?
As I share with you, I don't think because as the article said, not because somebody go through the process doesn't mean that it's not important to the person. Right. But I know, for example, when my mom passed away in 2004. No, 2004. Yeah, 2004.
I was going to say 24. I knew it was a 4.
Yeah, 2004. Okay. And, one of the things as I continued to ponder and think about is that one of the things I would love for her to be part of was my graduation, my ordination, and my first sermon, and to meet my daughters. And, I would think about those moments, and I would be sad, to be quite honest, because she's not there to celebrate those moments because I'm the last child.
Right.
So, but that's the phone, baby.
Oh man.
The storage.
All right, let's keep going. Yeah.
So, it was kind of, I was saddened. I got dispirited.
Can I get up?
And yeah, go ahead. I got, dispirited, and it was really a sad moment in my life. Where I have to, I didn't get too crazy, where I began to, bawl, cry out, but it was a moment for me to kind of reflect and just to it'd be nice to have her there to celebrate those moments with me. But unfortunately, that didn't, I know you share with your mom.
I believe that's called secondary loss in our notes. It's when you have already grieved initially, but then you realize that the loss of that one person creates a domino effect of loss. Like you said, you lost your mom, but then you have all these milestones like graduation and kids, and you said about marriage and meeting me. You're like, oh, I would have wished my mom would have gotten to be a part of this. And I think all of us feel that. I posted a picture online how I went to Albany, New York this past week to advocate for my daughter's charter school, and I was just excited about it. My Auntie Pat, shout out Auntie Pat, who pretty much was right there my whole upbringing and kept my hair fly. She said, you know what, I'm so proud of you, your mom.
It's okay. It's okay.
She said your mom would have been proud of you. And I had been thinking that, right? I had told you that. And I said, all the stuff that's happening lately, I really wish my mom was here for. She died 2 weeks before my 40th birthday. And birthdays are a big thing for me, and even much more so now. And so every time I hit like a milestone, I'm like, I wish she was there for this. Or when I graduated finally with my doctorate, I was like, oh, I wish you were here for this. So it's those secondary losses that really kind of trigger your grief. You also noted in your notes, and gosh, got me. I'm crying if it's the audio. If you hear, I'm crying. And my mom passed away in 2019. It'll be 4 years this year, and it still feels like the next day, every day. But I'm doing so much better. But even when I just bring her up, it brings me sad, because it's the love, right? We just looked at a quote that said, the greatest price of love is grief. The greatest price that you'll receive from loving is loss.
It's loss, right?
And there's another quote. It's better to have loved and lost than to not have loved at all, right? But another thing I wanted to talk about too is grief triggers, and that was on our notes too. Grief triggers when something happens at the loss of a pet, or the loss of a parent, or loss of a spouse, or loss of a thing. Just the idea of maybe a whiff of perfume goes past and it makes you remind you of a person, or maybe a favorite song, right? Or a song that's shared. Thank you. Creates an instant reminder of that person for grief, right? That happens to me all the time.
Secondhand grief.
Yeah.
I remember a moment when I was in seminary and I was going to my genogram.
Yeah.
Genogram, excuse me. And the genogram basically is doing your family tree background. And as I was doing it, not knowing who my biological dad was.
When you did the genogram.
Right. Oh. And I remember moments where I began to cry.
Well, you thought it was, didn't you think it was
but
your dad?
At
that point?
Yes, my dad, my real dad.
Right.
But here's the thing though. The more that I was seeing kids, father affirming their son, especially when we get married, right?
Yeah.
When I get married, I remember I said, man, it would be nice if my dad was there to bless, to give me the blessing that I need. And I tell you, you talk about secondhand grief when these moments come and you want your dad there to support you and he's not there.
Yeah.
You go through that process, and there are moments where I cry. I wish I would have my dad blessing me.
Yeah.
But in hindsight, that didn't happen.
You know what? And for whatever reason that is, that your dad was not there, or the absence of
he
that.
Died. Yeah.
You turned out to be a phenomenal father.
But one other thing, though, thank you so much.
Absolutely phenomenal father.
Thank you.
I've seen bad fathers. I know what the love of my father feels like, and I know my girls feel that times 10.
Yeah. But one of the things I said to myself, Joe, right? And as we get into probably part 2, as we talk about that. No, but one of the things that God has really helped me on my journey with this thought is that, I cannot change the past.
Right.
But what can I learn from the past? And I can accept it. Accept it mean that it was right, but in the sense of I can learn and move on. So I said to myself, okay,
Mhm.
and I said to my daughters, you're gonna know me.
Mhm.
You're gonna know me because to go through that feeling, not him being there. Imagine how my daughters feel
Mhm.
if I'm not there with them.
Oh my
So
God. Our
when you
youngest
feel
doesn't
the
even like
pain,
when you're gone all
yeah.
day.
So when you
She's
feel
sad.
the pain, you don't want that person to go through that pain because you know
Right.
the devastation. Because some people don't make it out of it. Some
Right.
people do end up doing some crazy stuff.
Well, look, according to the American Psychological Association, intense grief can become life-threatening through the disruption of the immune system. That means it can impact your health, self-neglect, and also can lead to suicidal thoughts. Grief may also take the form of regret for something lost, remorse for something done, or sorrow for a mishap done to oneself.
Right.
So grief shows up in many different ways. Like I said, the number one area of grief for me is the loss of my parents. I have none. We both have none, right? And so that, I think we witness secondary loss. At least I know I do, when my youngest daughter says, well, where's my grandpa? Or where's my grandma? Our youngest was 1 when my mom passed. And she sees her, and we have a little bit of pictures with her in the family pictures, Zarin. But just my dad.
But even that,
she doesn't even know him.
Even with that, when our daughter's saying that gonna trigger some stuff in us.
Yeah.
Right? Because what do I say to my daughters? Grandpa, because she always say, "Oh, grandpa," I see the moon and say, "That's grandpa, that's grandpa."
Yeah.
So oftentimes I don't say anything because not knowing who my real dad was, how can I tell my daughter?
Her grandpa is both.
It's both.
I would say it's Mr. Graham and it's Mr. Brown. Right. Both names.
So
he's
not Mr. Brown. But the point is that sometimes our daughters kind of trigger those
what do you
secondary
say to
grief that we
people
go through
when they're going through grieving
Right.
situations? That's another big one with ministries. Like, just what do you say? The reason why we even started this conversation was because we were in church two Sundays ago. One of our deacons said, every weekend in January we've had a funeral. Every weekend we went to someone's funeral, and people's brothers are dying, people's mothers are dying, people's spouses are dying, and just numerous amounts of people are dying. And what do we say? 5 people grieve just from one person's passing alone. So how do we help? What are we to say?
Well, we're going to get into that in part 2 of our discussion.
Did I say the reasons why we grieve? And there's a couple of reasons. Secondary loss, we just talked about.
Secondary loss. Right.
Grief of personal goals is another one. We anticipated something to happen, or we did this and we lost it, right? Loss of independence is a big one. Maybe you were into a car accident and you lost the function of your lungs, or you lost your ability, not of your lungs, Christ, lost your ability to
your individuality
function.
Right, your function.
So you're grieving because you're not as independent and you have to depend on someone else. That was a big one for my mom when she wasn't able to take care of herself anymore.
And she gave up.
And no. I'm just saying, loss of her independence. She was heavily independent, and then she had to have oxygen, and then she had to have people come and take care of her. And then later at the end, I literally had to get her and pick her up and put her in the tub and wipe her.
Right.
And take care of
all those
that's
independency
grieving.
has been taken away.
Yeah.
And that grieving sometimes
you're grieving the loss of
psychologically
definitely
weaken the body.
Loss of safety is another one. I'm thinking about one of my bestest friends. She lives at home by herself. She's a single mom, and someone tried to come in. They were drunk and they mistook her house for their house. And so it's 3:00 in the morning and they're shaking the handle on the door, trying to put their keys in the door. And that petrified her. She's a single mom, carries a gun, and she was ready to go to town. But that loss created a loss of safety for her. And so now she is she really gets nervous sometimes being at home by herself, or prefers someone to be there with her. She has her kids, but it's still it seems like a little bit of that loss was that security and safety was stripped away.
Right, exactly. That's
Right,
security
so
net
that
has been taken
creates
away.
anticipatory grief.
Right,
Oh my
right.
God, I'm gonna be. What happens if someone's here and I'm, and then grief for loss of identity. That's a big one. I used to be this big person, and now I'm no longer that. So now what do I do?
But
What do I see
sometimes,
myself
our
as?
identity sometimes is wrapped up within the matriarch too.
Mhm.
Because when the matriarch die, your identity died with that person.
Identity. I think just
No.
for families' identity.
That's my point. That's
Okay,
my point.
okay.
You're, individually and collectively.
Yeah.
Because she was the matriarch of the family. She hold the family. She's like the glue at the family. So sometimes our identity wrapped up. Because I say in psychology, most strong people find their identity in the group that they're associated with. Right.
I would even say with this one, when you talk about loss of identity, maybe you're a pastor of a church for 57 years and you retire.
That's a big one.
Now what are you doing? Right?
That's a big one.
Maybe you're a parent and you lost your child and you're no longer a parent.
Because
you're losing identity.
Just like I said, that
grief.
Our identity wrapped up in our work, right?
Yeah.
The things that we do, we build our identity.
Culture of identifiers.
Right,
I'm a professor. You're a doctor. You're this. You're that. And so when you lose those titles, sometimes you lose a little bit of, okay, what do I do now?
Well, that's the problem. We don't want to go into the process called diaspora, in the sense of you take on so much function that you lose a true identity, your true calling.
No.
So the point is,
I'm not talking about that.
No,
I'm just saying.
I understand. But in those situations,
but those are heavy.
Those are heavy, and those are reality. But the other thing, though, you gotta know who you are. That's important, right? And if your identity wrapped up in those things you mentioned,
that is who they are.
Right. That's the thing.
So then how do you, but then you have to tread lightly, because you can't disenfranchise their grief, because a lot of people are proud of what they do.
That is true. That is true.
And so
that is true.
Our biggest one, when our lead pastor, our former pastor, retired, he was in ministry for 50 something years. And he had to retire because of his health. And then he is no longer the pastor of the churches that he built, the Bronx community that he curated. Right. I mean, he was the bishop of the Bronx.
Right, and then the bishop of the Bronx.
He is no longer that.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a stark loss of identity. Like, then what do you do? Who am I after I've spent years of God's calling building this, and I am no longer that? Like, what do you do? That's heavy.
That's heavy. That's heavy. It is.
And I don't think that should be overlooked.
No,
it's not saying that people shouldn't get wrapped up in their titles, because their title is what made them who they are. Right.
Right. Well, that is true. That is true.
And I think that's important. People. Some people are born to be parents, and if that gets taken away, then what are you left? What are you left? And the biggest thing is, and we'll get into that, what does the Bible say about how to heal?
Right.
How are you supposed to cope with that?
And then we're going to talk about the myth about
that's just heavy.
grief.
I can't get away from that one.
Once we delve into that, we'll get into some of the myths about grief. Because it's very important, you all.
You know what? Can you grieve? I don't know. That's just I'm stuck on that, and it helped me move away from it. Grief of loss of identity. What about grieving for a loss of wanting something? Is that loss of personal goals? Like you had your heart or your mind set on something.
Something. I'm glad you said that.
And then you don't get it.
Because remember, 2022, man, my wife and I, we got beat up. I mean, stuff that we wanted, and
not even arguably the worst year of my life, but bona fide.
But yeah, because the stuff that you qualify for it.
Yeah.
Not say you're overconfident, but you know that you were trained, that you prepare for this job, for this task. And then, I remember when I thought me and our oldest daughter, we thought that she got the job. But when she told us, man, we went through the process of grief with you, because that was a loss for the family too.
Yeah.
And
it's almost like when you see something and it's yours and it's so close, you can touch it, right? You can smell it. It's tangible. It's right there. Or like if you see those videos when people are running towards the finish line in those track meets and stuff like that, and then right before they get to the finish line, they like fall, and they're just like, and they don't get there, and they don't win the race.
But you know something?
Like
I'm glad you used that analogy. I saw one where the son was running in a relay, and well, I'm not really, but he was running, and I think have a muscle contract.
Yeah.
And he couldn't make it, and the dad ran out. We want to talk more about that.
Okay.
And the dad ran out and helped his son finish the race.
That's
the key.
To do it.
That's the key.
But what if ain't nobody helping? What if everybody looking at you like, damn?
But that's the thing, because that's gonna be the next part we're gonna talk about that.
Okay.
Because that's important, because that's about community, right?
Yeah.
We're supposed to help assist each other to overcome those processes.
And it's
those experiences.
And it's just so many different ways to grieve, I think. And so the loss of a loved one is definitely top. People also lose loss of pets was one that was on that list. Loss of jobs, loss of opportunities. It's a heavy, but just the grief of personal goals, that's a herder. And even the lost identity. I haven't felt that, but I've definitely had grief around who am I outside of what I identify myself as.
But you know,
right?
Wow.
Like, I'm a mom, I'm a this, but then who is Frankie? Like, who am I?
But here's another thing, though, as we get into the next part, right?
Let's talk about the myths, and then let's finish, and then we'll.
The myth's going to be in part 2.
Oh well, let's keep this conversation going.
You remember in the movie, The Passion of Christ? The Passion of the Christ with Mel.
I know it, but do I remember Gibson skits and parts? No.
There were a portion in the movie at the end when Christ was placed on the cross, he was dying, and he said, "Father, Father, why have you forgiven me?" And I didn't notice that, but after you saw a raindrop as represented tears of the Father, job, right? And you know, God grieved when He's lost His Son, but He knew that He had to give His Son up, because the Bible said God did not even spare His own Son. So imagine the magnitude that the Father has to do in order to go through that grief process, that giving of the Son for us. And that's what grief is. One of the things, the process, you know, that's what grief is. I'm correct myself. We have to give up ourselves in order to heal people. You know, so we're going to talk more about that a little bit, because that is important. That is very important. So when I saw that part in the movie, I was moved.
What was just talking about?
Well, no, you want to jump in the mid, but I want to go into
talking about. My challenge was knowing my many identities, but not knowing who I was.
Right, but you mentioned the myth part. Following, so
okay.
But anyway,
it did segue.
Right. So,
have you ever had an issue with or a conflict about your identity, or found grief in not knowing who you were?
Oh, definitely. Oh, definitely. Because when I didn't know what I want to be, what I want to become,
professionally,
you know, you have those challenges that is placed before you. I remember somebody even tell me I would never become anything, and I would ponder on those words, and it would lead me into a stage where I would grieve a little bit about it. But you know, but here I am by the grace of God.
Well, you got over it, I guess.
Well, yeah, you know, in the sense of God was the key.
Sometimes that gets heavy on people.
It does.
They manifest that, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
But exactly. But the other thing.
My mama said I wasn't going to be nothing. My daddy said I wasn't going to be nothing. So I guess
I heard that been said about me.
Right. I guess I'm never going to be.
I heard that said about me, that I would never be anything.
So leave us with, how did you flip that?
You know how I flipped that?
How did you flip that to be someone? Let's leave it on a positive note.
The way I come to be who I am today is when God encountered me. When He comes into my life, and I begin to know who He is, then my self-esteem begin to develop. I begin to understand, yes, I do have the potential to be someone, even though I have my weaknesses and my challenges. Right, so God encountered me, And when he encountered me and I began to grow in my faith in him, I realized the potential that I do have. I mean, for example, I got my doctorate, I got my master, I got my associate, I got my bachelor. People was telling me that I would never be, and I got teachers back home in Jamaica who said I would never be anything. I got somebody in the family tell me that I would never be anything, right? So those words.
You feel? I've never. That's never happened to me. I've had people tell me a lot of different things, but
listen,
like that's a blow, especially to black men.
It is a blow. Yeah. It is a blow. But here's the thing: when God encountered me in 1991, my world turned upside down. No, don't get me wrong. The journey was not easy, right? There has to be some challenges going along the way.
Right. Or it would be too easy.
It would be too easy.
And anybody could do it. Right?
But, you realize that even though what people said to you may cause grief on your soul, we call it now, level residue on your spirit.
Yeah.
God has a way to override all of that. And that is his son, Jesus Christ. So I'm going to leave that on the end and we'll talk about
how to
the stages,
make that yours, right? I agree.
And how you do it. And we cannot overlook that. So we want to thank you so much for joining us. Guys. God bless you so much. As you can see, this was very emotional for my wife.
My God.
But it's okay.
I mean, I don't mind it. I'm radically transparent, as I say all the time, and what you see is what you get. Right. I'll cry. I cry anyway. I cry at commercials, and that's probably grief in itself.
You don't cry for me?
No, you're right here. You're right. But I would tear up at the thought of you not being here with us. Yes. But we all have our stages. We all have our triggers. Definitely just talking about my mom sometimes gets me into it. But that's the love that I have for her. The insurmountable love I have for her, and the love that you might have for your parents. And it's okay to cry. Crying is not a sign of weakness. Crying is an emotion that we all feel. And if you don't cry, if you don't have that grief come out, remember the only way to cure grief is to grieve. You'll see that and it'll manifest in other ways. And so we'll talk about that on our next show, our next episode, our part 2, about how grief actually shows up mentally and physically in your body. So with that, guys, we want to thank you so much. We are concluding part 1 of the lunch note, and we will be chatting soon.
Be blessed.
Be blessed.